All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Sophie Leon. I'm the Director for Diversity Initiatives and Resource Centers at Cal State Fullerton. And we are here with an event in the Titan Dreamers Resource Center in collaboration with our partners, legal service providers from the organization CARECEN. So I'm going to have our presenters introduce themselves and our graduate student assistant from the Titan Dreamers Resource Center first, actually. So Vidi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Vidi, pronoun she, her, and I am the graduate assistant of the Titan Dreamers Resource Center.
Thank you, Vidi. And I will ask our presenters to introduce themselves as well. So Jose, would you like to start?
Thank you, Sophie. My name is Jose Mejia. I'm the attorney assigned for Cal State Fullerton, and I'm also assigned to the Defense, Deportation Defense Unit. And I'm happy to be here and like to present my legal assistant, Sarai.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarai. So I work with CARECEN. I support Jose and other CARECEN staff and the legal services that we provide. So I'm happy to be here with you all today.
All right, thank you so much to you both. And for those who are here, I'm just sharing in the chat the check-in link. If you can just click that, there's just a couple of pieces of information that we ask. And if folks trickle into the live event, we'll continue to share that as well. All right, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jose and Sarai. I've got the slides on my screen, so let me know when is the right time to switch slides, and I'll hand it over to you.
So I think we can get started with the next slide. And the slide is just an overview of everything that we're going to cover today, a little bit about how to schedule an appointment, general tenants' rights, how things have been impacted by COVID, and then some other information about home ownership and the Golden State stimulus. So just a quick disclaimer, the presentation is not intended to be legal advice, and the information presented is just general information regarding tenancy and housing information. For specific legal advice, we recommend contacting an attorney or an agency that can assist you with the details of your case. CARECEN is a Central American Resource Center. We were founded back in 1983. And back in 2019, the state allocated statewide funding for all of the CSUs to receive immigration legal services. As a result, CARECEN was contracted to service 8 campuses here in SoCal, and one of these is CSUF. So you can schedule an appointment through Simply Book Me. Log into the site and find your campus, CSUF. If you are a first-time person who has never met with anybody from CARECEN before, you can select an initial appointment and just a general consultation. And the link should pop up, the carecenla.simplybookme.me. So that should take you to the site. And so from here, I'll pass it off to Jose.
Thank you, Sarai. So we wanted to start off with a general overview of what are tenants' rights. The first thing that comes to mind is obviously because of the COVID-19 emergency, a lot of people think the laws have been flexed or been canceled, and that's not the case. COVID-19 has not changed the law. And this is kind of an overview of what you need to know. This is regarding any type of tenancy. So as a tenant, you have the right to quiet enjoyment. That basically means you have a right to be left alone. So that means that the landlord can't constantly disturb you, can give you a lot of notices, can come into your apartment or your house just because. So any notices regarding repairs needs to be provided in writing, and they have to be given a specific time period. The right to be given reentry is 24 hours. So if there's an issue and the landlord says, well, I need to go in and fix something, they have to give you a 24-hour notice before to live in. Part of that notice includes having the information as to what the issue is going to be about. And also having repairs, and having a habitable unit, meaning that the property is livable. There's a lot of housing codes. Every city has their own particular set of housing codes, and there's an enforcement agency in most counties. So if there's an issue, I would suggest contacting the city or county housing department to see if there's something that can be done, an inspection of the property. And the last note on this section was that there is no self-help eviction. If a landlord tells you to leave the premises for whatever reason, maybe there's somebody there as a guest, maybe you haven't paid rent, it doesn't mean that the landlord can kick you out. There's no self-help. They have to literally have to go to court. They have to give you notice, and then they have to go to court and give you an actual summons. So the entire process takes its time. So that's something to remember. There's no self-help evictions in California. Next slide. I do want to talk about the COVID-19 laws that came into effect last year. And this governs up to the summer of this year, how the tenancy rules are going to be in place, in effect. So there's an AB, Assembly Bill 3088 passed regarding tenancy. And the first thing I want to mention is that the bill pretty much states that there is no rent forgiveness. The code and the law basically says if you lost your job or your work hours were cut, it still means you still owe rent, and it still means the landlord can still take you to court. However, because of the pandemic and because of public policy, the assembly decided there's certain things that need to be done to protect the tenants. So I consider it a two-step law. The first step was regarding right at the beginning of the pandemic from March to August. And obviously, because of the pandemic, we didn't want people homeless to be on the streets, to be in crowded areas like such as courtrooms. So the state basically said no evictions at all, unless for safety and health reasons. Safety and health reasons, it's a pretty tight set of rules. The more common ones I remember seeing when I used to practice this was violence, drug dealing, police involvement regarding some kind of family dispute. So nothing regarding any type of I didn't pay my rent or I can't pay my rent. That didn't apply. The law basically said if you lost your job because of COVID or your hours were reduced, you can basically provide a declaration to your landlord saying, I declare that I lost my job, and that's it. The landlord couldn't ask you for your tax returns. It couldn't ask you for a letter from your employer. That the law was pretty much an emergency law, saying we'll take your word, tenant, that because of this occurred to you, and we'll give you protection. The second step was regarding September 1st all the way to June 30th. Now, this step could be extended. The original bill had it up to January 30th, 2021. Naturally, because the COVID-19 pandemic still raging, it was pushed back. There could be an amendment to this bill. It could be a supplemental bill as well next month if this is still an issue in California, which I do think it will be an issue. But this second step is a little bit different from the first. So we still have the no eviction for COVID declaration. If you lost your job, your hours were reduced, you can still tell the landlord, this is my declaration. However, if the issue is still pending from September up to June 30th, you still have to pay at least 25% of that rent. And the mindset behind this policy was because at this point, there's some kind of financial relief from stimulus, from rental relief programs that we'll discuss in a minute. So the assembly thought, well, at least they can pay a portion of it to the rent. Same thing with evictions. Even if you can't pay 25%, it's added on, but the landlord can take you to court and says, well, you know what? You didn't pay me that money, so I'm going to evict you. The same policies of safety and health still apply. One of the wrinkles to this law is something that we've never seen before, and that's regarding small claims. And that's something we'll discuss in a minute, but it's basically saying that if the landlord has to take you to court or there's an issue disputing the regulations of this bill, you have the right to go to small claims court, the tenant or the landlord. One thing to note, and something I do make an emphasis on a lot of our clients, is that it doesn't mean just because you have a judgment, you have an automatic credit report issue. It doesn't mean that. The regulatory bill made it very clear that it doesn't apply. Next slide, please. So, discussing small claims court, we consider it the people's court. I remember practicing in this field before law school, and it was a very interesting field to be in. And because there's no attorneys, it means that literally you would have what you see on court TV and you see on TV. A lot of people going to court regarding various issues. Now, the reason I bring this up in this situation is because AB 3888 authorizes landlords to go to small claims court. And like I had mentioned previously, that was never the case. It's a new wrinkle in the law, and because the fact that small claims is used very widely, it could cause some issues such as delays in the system. The good thing about small claims court, because it's the people's court, the state assembly mandates that every county have a free small claims advisory program. Orange County has one, and we provided the link there. And it's basically attorneys, paralegals, legal assistants, and other people trained in small claims procedure, advising you how to fill out paperwork, how to collect judgments, and general policy. They're not authorized to give you legal advice, so that's the wrinkle there. But they can basically tell you how to fill out forms and show you samples and whatnot. It's always been the case that tenants can sue for security deposits and damages. That's generally where the issues generally arises. You leave and the landlord doesn't want to give you back your money, or you leave and the landlord gives you a bill and you're disputing that bill. So hiring an attorney costs a lot of money. So small claims venue is the appropriate section for you to go and file your case. The landlords now can use it. Once the pandemic ends, they can go to small claims court. The reason landlords never went to small claims court is because by law it was prohibited. They want the right to obtain the property, requires what we call a possession. And small claims is just a writ of execution. And execution in small claims parley means money. So a landlord could only go to court, ask you to pay some damages, but not to kick you out of the facility of your home. But because landlords can actually now go to court, this will be an interesting process, simply because landlords cannot deny rental relief. They have to work with the tenant to see what programs are out there from the city or from the county or from the state for the tenant or the landlord to qualify for any type of rental relief. If the landlord says, I don't want to help you, and they'll sue you for, let's say, $10,000. If it comes out in court that there's various programs and the tenant applied for them and the landlord didn't provide any documentation, didn't talk to the spokesperson, then in that case, the damages will be reduced or denied. Small claims is very strict. The judges have a lot of power because you only have one right to appeal. So if the judge denies you and you file an appeal and they see that nothing was done, that's it. I mean, there's not much you can do in small claims. The great thing about small claims is no immigration status needed. They're not going to ask you to write an ITIN or social. It's completely free, and that goes with the programs for the advisors. It's free. So they're not going to ask you anything about any status. Next slide, please. So we mentioned rental relief, and this is where this comes into play, and it comes into the AB 3888 and the small claims emphasis of it. So Federal CARES Act distributed funds to the states, and each section had different distribution. There's a section there for housing. So it allows up to $10,000 to landlords and tenants back rent. So that means that remember March 20th all the way to June 30th is the law in California. For rental relief is March 1st all the way to April of this year. So 2 months delay, but it covers that date. So what does that mean? So if you're the tenant, you can go to the housing is key and you can apply, and the landlord can basically authorize to say, okay, if this tenant owes me, let's say $1,000, but they're willing to waive $200, they'll get the $800 in their bank, or they get a check. If the landlord refuses, the law says the tenant will get up to 25% of that. So if you owe 1,000 and the landlord says, no, I want my 1,000, the state will give you $250 as an example. The state also has that ability to pay up to 25% of future rent and utility assistance. Next slide, please. So what are the qualifications for this program? They're pretty broad, and this is the good thing about it is that the program is meant to help the tenants and the landlords get out of this financial burden. So if you have anybody who's unemployed, or you were unemployed yourself, and you show proof you were getting benefits, you qualify automatically. You have a reduction in household income. One of the members in the household lost their job, or their time was reduced, you qualify. The issues also applies to people that might be at risk of being homeless or housing instability, such as getting an eviction notice or past due rent notices. And then it covers people that make less than 80% of the median income in your community. Qualifications are very broad. I've seen the qualifications up to declarations under perjury saying that I did lose my job, I'm being paid, I was paid in cash, and as a result, I can't pay my rent. The state would say, okay, your declaration is sufficient. So I would definitely urge you to apply. The qualifications are very broad. This is just the main points. There's a lot of other variables where the state will allow you to apply. Again, no immigration status required to apply for this program. It's more of a way to build that tenancy and that landlord trust, and to have that housing stability in California. One thing I do want to mention that's something that's been brought up is whether this is considered a public charge. I know for immigration practices, we always hear this question regarding people obtaining benefits from the government. This is not a benefit. This is just a rental relief. So the big difference is this is an emergency program that everybody qualifies for. So you obtaining any type of relief under this program does not mean that it would be considered a public charge when you're applying for any type of immigration benefit. Next slide, please. Okay, so the question comes up, well, housing is key to the state program. Well, how do I apply? So every city or county has different ways of going about it. So the state allows the county to decide how they're going to distribute funds. Orange County, for example, has its own program. It's under the 211 program that anybody in Orange County, except if you're a resident of 3 cities, can apply for rental relief. The 3 cities that are the exemption have their own fund, and they're Anaheim, they're Santa Ana, and they're Irvine. Those are the web links to the addresses for you to apply. It depends on the administration of each program. I know for a fact Santa Ana is still accepting applicants. Other cities vary. Some have closed, some might reopen. And Orange County is in that stage where it closed, but it could reopen. There's still funds available. So definitely take a look if you live in these cities or you have family living in these cities to see what the deadlines are. Don't be surprised if they reopen these programs and they don't advertise them simply because there's a lot of information and need out there. So I would suggest going to these sites, maybe getting some type of mailing service registering so you get any notifications of any programs in your city. Next slide, please. So there's another program that was created actually pretty recently, a few months ago, but it started coming into effect last month. And that's the Golden State Stimulus. So it's the franchise tax board that administers this program. And the way this works is kind of like a program that's similar to the regular federal stimulus relief act, except that it's more inclusive. So the state understood that there's a lot of people in our community that didn't qualify for the stimulus simply because of status, or simply because they were getting some kind of benefit and the government felt that that wasn't enough. So this stimulus applies to people that have the California Earned Income Tax Credit up to $30,000. It also applies to a lot of people with ITINs. And the qualifications for ITINs are up to $75,000. The good thing about the ITIN folks is that if you make less than 30,000 with an ITIN, but you file with an ITIN, you can get up to 1,200. So the state created that exemption to allow folks to get basically up to the first relief status. So I think that's a great wrinkle there in the law that allows folks to do that, because a lot of people in our community, that's what they work with an ITIN. CAPI is another program. And that CAPI is a program that assists a lot of folks that have immigration status that's kind of in a gray area. The more common one are people that had asylum cases denied, but they basically got an exemption from being basically given an order to leave, or people in the status where it's still changing. It definitely is a program that is geared towards people that are either seniors, have medical disabilities, and it's a program that if you are a part of it, you qualify for $600 under the stimulus. I would encourage you, if you have anybody in that category that you might think might qualify for CAPI benefits, to go to the state website just to see, that might be a program that might be something the family can qualify for. CalWorks, that's the general relief program we have in California. If you get CalWorks, you're eligible for the benefit as well. The one thing is they do require filing taxes of this year. So I would encourage you to file it, even if you don't make much, file it anyway. That way the state obtains the information so they can start sending out checks. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So now I want to turn the page over and now talk about homeownership. It's part of the tenancy series we're discussing. I know this has been in the news as well, regarding what, if anything, is available, simply because California has such a housing shortage. And it's something that you've seen or heard in the news about low interest rates, people trying to buy homes and getting into bidding wars and whatnot. So there's a lot of benefits in owning a property, and there's always competition because you're in California. So this is a state where property values tend to hold their ground or increase pretty often. I can tell you a city that's completely opposite of any city in California is Las Vegas and Nevada. They tend to have the most volatile real estate market in the country, simply because they depend so much on tourism and they depend so much on people going there having a good time. So you might have other states and other popular cities in the country have different views of homeownership, but California, what we have in California tends to be unique in terms of trying to have stability. So it's something that a lot of people thought about, especially working remotely. Maybe I should buy a house somewhere that's closer to my family or farther away from the big cities or more economically. So I do want to discuss a few things here about this regarding home ownership. So the first one is that you need to have legal status to buy a house. California and the United States don't have that requirement in general. You're not going to see that in any type of covenant, we call it in real estate. It's against public policy. In fact, the few covenants that were included back in the 50s and 60s were racially based. or were gender-based, they were all struck down by the Supreme Court. So it doesn't matter if you have, DACA or you have a mixed family. You can buy a house, register under your name, and have somebody register under their name, and they might have any legal status. So that's perfectly fine. Second one comes back to California. You need to be wealthy to buy a property. Not the case. I know in certain cities, naturally, that's a big problem, right? That if you want to buy something in the city of Los Angeles, it's very expensive. And that's because of the regulations, the few homes available, and the fact that it's a very popular city. So you can still buy property anywhere in California, in Orange County, and in LA County. It could be a condominium, it could be a townhome, it could be a house. But you just got to keep that in mind, that just because you don't make a certain amount of money, it doesn't mean you can't buy any property. A third myth that comes along, this is something that I've seen pretty common, is the perception that you can have 20% down payment. This 20% down payment is something that is, I would say, back from the 1950s. This is a concept that banks had back then. And it's so popular that a lot of people still believe it, simply because 20% down payments back in the 50s and 60s are nowhere near as there are today. If you're talking about a property that costs $500,000, you're asking basically for a $100,000 down payment. Not a lot of people have that much money. And if you're looking at properties throughout the country, banks figured that out pretty soon, I would say in the 80s. So what we have now is a variety of programs. Banks, credit unions, and mortgage brokers all offer a different type of program. So you could definitely go into a bank or one of these agencies, and you'll be surprised that there might be programs for 5%, 3%. I've seen 1%. I work with people that have 1% down payments. So these are programs that they don't advertise, but they're very common. It's not something you would have to go out and search for. The good thing is that there are programs that help you look for these mortgages and these properties, and they basically are nonprofits that are licensed by the HUD agency. So the federal government licenses these nonprofits throughout the country to basically provide free housing advice, free programs, free analysis of any financing. And their duty or their fiduciary duty is to you, to make sure you can get any program, any grant available, any type of program that the federal government offers, or any nonprofit nearby. Orange County has one. It's called the Affordable Housing Clearinghouse. It's a nonprofit that it is HUD certified. You don't have to go to that agency. You can definitely go to HUD.gov and search for a different one. But that one's the more prevalent one in Orange County. And most of them, some offer reverse mortgages advice for people that are seniors. Some are first-time home buyers for a lot of young folks. Some are refinance experts. So you have a variety of programs that these agencies offer, and that's their specialty that's free. If you have to pay anything, it's probably just to do a certification, and it's basically the market rate, nothing expensive. And I do encourage all of you to go through these agencies simply because you'll probably get the most transparent information out there compared to going to a private real estate or broker. Another myth that comes along talking about the brokers is that only banks give out loans. I can't tell you how many people I worked with in my past experience where, as a foreclosure advisor, most of my clients did not have bank loans. They had mortgage brokers. They had credit unions. And I work with those folks, and they tend to be very open about how they run their operations. Because when you consider your local bank, that is the policy of that bank. So if you go to a big national bank, that policy in Santa Ana is going to be the same policy in San Francisco. But if you have mortgage brokers or credit unions that are very localized, and there's a lot of credit unions nationwide, And there's a lot of mortgage brokers that work with small banks you never heard of. But because they have that ability to pull networking from different sources, they can provide property owners with different options. So definitely there's other options besides the bank to work with. And the last one, it goes back to the first one, you don't have to have legal status to obtain loans. There's a lot of private mortgages, there's a lot of brokers, and there's some banks and credit unions that will work with you if you have an ITIN, if you have DACA. So keep that in mind. A lot of them are more focused on your financing. They're not focused on your legal status. Next slide, please. So financing the home is the second thing that comes to mind. One, can I buy a house? Second, how am I going to pay for it? So this is where you have to come into your financial ability, is to decide, can you afford the house? Okay. And I go one step further. I say, can you afford the mortgage? You will be surprised to know that if you own a house and banks are willing to lend you money, you can have 3 to 4 mortgages. I have one client that had 5 mortgages. I don't know how they got them, but they were all reputable banks. So the way a bank or a broker sees it, because you're in California and there's a house, it's property, you basically are earning income in that property, right? It's going to go up. That's the theory. It's a theory because there's nothing guaranteed that it's not going to go down. But one thing I do want to advise you is that only have one mortgage is probably the best situation for all of you. Simply because having multiple mortgages brings out multiple different issues that come into play. And you don't want to be in that situation where you might have one bank demanding different set of rules compared to another bank that will leave you alone. So if you can afford a house, think about just having one mortgage. Again, the 20% down payment is a myth. You can finance as low as 3%, which is very common in the industry, or 5% in several markets. So one thing about the down payment myth is, I'm sure some of you are going to be asking, well, what's the catch? Well, there must be an issue here. What do I get, or what do they get in return if I don't put 20%? So there's a concept here of 3 concepts: PMI, interest, and second mortgages. So PMI is basically insurance. If you get a loan, some loans will ask you to get insurance on top of that mortgage if you don't have 20%. So that's basically the bank saying, we'll give you a loan. We know you only have 3%. We'll take it, but you need to get this insurance just to make sure that you don't go foreclose on us, or you'll basically stop paying. The insurance isn't that much, but I know a lot of people don't like paying insurance on top of something such as a mortgage. You can shop around, because if you don't want to pay PMI, there's some brokers and banks that will say, well, we'll just charge you a higher interest loan, right? The interest rates are low right now. So if you say, well, I have a loan down payment, but I don't want to pay insurance, higher interest might work for you, simply because the banks will make more money. And at that point, you don't have to go out there and get another insurance. Another benefit is, unlike insurance, interest is deductible with taxes. So you have that option that you can deduct them in your end of the year taxes. The second mortgage is the last option. That goes back to my first point of not having more than one mortgage. If you need a second mortgage, for example, there's people that buy homes with 2 mortgages. One, they get the mortgage for the down payment, and then they get the mortgage for the house. Again, not recommended, but it is something that is very common in the industry. So if it's an option, I would say be cautious about it, but it is an option. FHA loans. FHA loans are government loans. So they're the Federal Housing Authority. They will give you loans as long as you have an LPR or some kind of mixed status families. FHA loans tend to be very generous in their credit reporting. They have very low standards because their policy is to try to make home available to many folks out there. So they do require more down payment, or they require more fees, but it's something that I'm sure any bank, broker, or credit union is probably going to have as an option, because they're federal loans. So it's something to look into if you come from that kind of a mixed or LPR status family and you're considering purchasing a property. However, if there's an issue, banks and mortgage brokers don't have those policies of having some kind of status. Like I said, they're concerned about financing more than anything else. So you can have a broker that will give you a property and they'll just require, instead of 6 months, pay stubs, they require a year. Or if they have a person on file that might not make enough, they might want somebody else to co-sign on the mortgage as a guarantor. Again, it doesn't stop. The bank's not going to say to you, or the broker's not going to say to you, you don't qualify because you don't have any status. It's more about financing. So that's the thing that varies. And some banks have a lot of programs that are geared for DACA and ITIN. Something to shop around for. The FHA, like I said, the HUD agency, they have data, they have a list of databases of banks that do those kind of cases locally. So I would suggest talking to them. If not, mortgage brokers, there are a variety out there. I mean, every county has different mortgage brokers, and they work with every type of bank and every type of client. So they have probably loans with banks you never heard of, but they're all reputable. So they might give you good deals that you might not get locally. And bottom line, keep in mind that legal status is not a barrier to obtaining financing. It's not a barrier to renting. It's not a barrier to obtaining a house or even to get a loan. Next slide. So I'm going to wrap up that here's a few resources that we do advocate for to use, simply because I know these are the ones that people use commonly. Small claims for sure. If it's something, that's the website there. If you need to go to court regarding tenancy, give them a call, go online, make an appointment. They're still seeing people, even in that pandemic, they're working remotely like we all are. Community Legal Aid SoCal, it's another great one. They do a lot of housing and tenancy law, and they do a lot of other good programs out there. It's a free program. Lawyers and paralegals there are willing to help. Public Law Center, another agency we work with. Same thing, lawyers, it's a nonprofit. Lawyers and paralegals, they're willing to help you out with any housing or other questions you might have. And then I have the California Housing Finance Agency. This is a department that gives out grants, and they have programs with counties and cities for people to qualify for first-time home buyer grants. Or maybe the city has an area that they designated for redevelopment, and they're giving out grants to people who want to buy in that area. So it's a great program the state has, and I would encourage you to see it in case there might be questions about financing and programs available in an area you're looking for. Next slide. Okay, so we want to thank you all for being here, and if you have any questions, we're here to listen to them. And definitely for any immigration law services, you can book us or follow us for sure on our Instagram page.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jose. Thank you, Sarai. That was really good information. Really informative to know how many options, resources, rights are available to folks, regardless of status, right? I think that was a real key there. So do just want to take a quick minute to see if anybody wanted to add anything or anybody had any questions before I end the recording. Vidi, Sarai, anything to add? No? All right, I'm going to stop the recording here. Oops, stop share.